Good evening, everybody. My name is Katrina Eisman. I'm the chair of the Masters in Digital Photography program here at the School of Visual Arts. It's a pleasure to see you all here. We have a very exciting panel discussion for you. And I have to admit, when Scott and Susan approached Tom Ash, the associate chair, and myself, about this idea of fugitive art, we were like, what? We didn't really quite get it, because Tom has spent years figuring out how to create accurate prints that last a lifetime. And Scott's pretty much, wherever he is, there he is, has sort of come up with this completely new idea to really question photography, printing, what the object means. So it was sort of like a little eye-opener for us to even meet with you and Susan. And so that's really what this evening is going to be about. You know, we're going to be questioning what we even think a photograph is, which I think is really interesting. So that's why the digital photography program, even though we're very into the technical and the archival and inks and paper and media and profiles and all this great stuff, are happy to host this panel, which is really a fabulous panel that Scott's going to introduce. So please help me in welcoming Scott Lerman.
Good evening. I'm Scott Lerman. I'm the co-curator with Susan Kaiser of the Fugitivart exhibition. I want to thank you for joining us along with our illustrious panel in talking about some ideas and trying to have an illuminating conversation about the nature of photography as an object or as an image. But before we start, I'd like to give you some background on what this is and where it comes from. Fugitivart is a conceptual exhibition. We are not in the business, Susan and I, of making fugitive prints. It's not a new business venture for us. We wanted to provoke conversation and discussion. We want to explore the implications of fine art photographs as ephemeral objects. For those of you who don't know fugitive as a term, it means likely to fade, deteriorate, or disappear. We coined that term, fugitive art, to describe a new genre of fine art prints, perhaps a hypothetical one in the end, that's intentionally made to fade. When developing fugitive art, Susan and I certainly appreciated the irony that Katrine was talking about of engineering photographic prints with short lives. Over the past decade, vast amounts of effort and money have gone into designing pigments, printers, papers, processes that ensure that our prints last for hundreds of years potentially. So particularly in color printing, this search for the holy grail of prints that you can pass down, that you can collect, that will continue to have value, we were going against that entire field of thought. Wilhelm Imaging Research, one of the leading resources for print testing in terms of longevity, is proudly cited by artists, by makers of printers for how long their prints are going to last. So how many of you are photographers or fine artists who make these kinds of prints? So you know how important it is that there be that label that says we used archival materials and processes. That, of course, is not what we're trying to do here. So as you might imagine, when we were working on this concept to approach those who are making inks for inkjet printing and saying that we would like them to help us to make prints that wouldn't last, it was a strange conversation. We were really a little concerned about the reaction. And surprisingly, we got very positive reactions from those we talked to. There was a sense that the obsession with the longevity for printmaking over other factors like cost, like the quality of the prints, was overboard, that there was another territory that was worth exploring. But frankly, for all those that we talked to about this, there really weren't many who could help us. For example, John, who was one of the first people I called because of his long history of developing inkjet printing for fine art, he had even started to make thrift inks, which are dye-based inks, which are encapsulated, in order to sort of move away from the expense of pigmented inks, longer lasting inks, but still have long life. And the discussion we had was, it wouldn't work for our purposes. It would just take way too long for any of them to fade. So we had to move on. However, when you start to search for this, we did finally find someone, a manufacturer, who was willing to work out the formulation of these inks. I have to let you know, though, that they want to remain anonymous. No, seriously, they want to remain anonymous. So we had finally put together our inks. We wanted to test the proposition. Would these prints fade in a way that was interesting, that was fast enough? We put them under grow lights, under intense southern exposure, in normal room light. And interestingly enough, the gallery where this exhibition is being held is under some of the most intense UV daylight bulbs you've ever seen. So we're already beginning to see some changes in the prints. So our experiment worked. We were able to make these prints that would fade in UV light. They also fade from ozone. And for good measure, we swab the back with citric acid. So for those of you who want to get some Fugitivart prints and hide them away in the dark, they are still going to deteriorate over time. So enough about process, let's talk about art. Soho Photo Gallery is hosting the Fugitivart exhibition throughout September. I hope you all will go to see it. The show includes 23 artists from across the world. There are 74 prints. There are over 118 images, and it covers over 235 linear feet of space. For those of you who are New Yorkers, you may not know, but that's nearly a city block of wall space. So this is not just about a process. We wanted to find a way to put together an exhibition that in itself could be curated to be compelling. Every print in the exhibition is one that was born, as we say, only a few weeks ago. Every image, though, is chosen because it expresses the idea of fugitive, we thought, in a distinctive and visually arresting way. For those of you who haven't been to the gallery yet, it spans 2 levels. It's worth going upstairs. How many of you, and now I can't see any of you because I'm blinded by the lights, have been to the exhibition so far? Quite a few of you. For those of you that haven't, 2 things to press you on to go. One is you can actually buy Fugitivart prints at the exhibition for $20. In other words, a nominal price, because you're borrowing them. So for those of you who'd like to borrow, rent, live with a print, it's a great way to do that. The other, as I said, is the intense lighting and UV in the show means that by the end of the month, they may be all gone. Fugitivart was designed to spur discussion in the photographic community, in this kind of community, on the issues and opportunities in making, in selling, in collecting of fine art prints. That's why we're here tonight. As I said, this is not about some venture to make Fugitivart prints in the long run. Susan Kaiser and I, my co-curator, would like to thank the SVA MPS Digital Photography Program under the direction of Katrine Eisman for sponsoring this discussion. It's very kind of them to do it, and I have to say it was encouraging to us, Katrine, to have someone who we called up who said, okay, we'll talk about this idea, and actually was quite helpful in encouraging us. So please join me in welcoming our panel, A.D. Coleman, John Cohn, Michael Foley, and W.M. Hunt. They really don't need much introduction, but I'd like to give you a little perspective. A.D. Coleman has published 8 books and more than 2,000, is that right? 2,000 essays on photography and related subjects. He's a former columnist for the New York Times, the Village Voice, the New York Observer. His work has been translated into 21 languages in 31 countries. He's the author of a widely read blog, Photo Critic International. Since 2005, his exhibitions that he's curated have been in galleries all over the world. So he certainly brings an extraordinary perspective on photography and art, and we hope on Fugitivart for today. Thank you for coming. John Cohn is a collaborative master printer, and I don't use the word collaborative lightly. He's someone who I think the community knows and admires so much because he helps artists with this process of making photography and art in a way that few do. He and his wife, Kathy Cohn, founded Cohn Editions Press in 1980 in Port Chester, New York, which was a printmaking workshop. And in 1984, he began collaborative digital printmaking with artists. So he was introducing and giving credibility to what had been seen as kind of a secondary media, not really a fine art media. So he's one of the people who made the idea of inkjet as synonymous with fine art printing really possible. He began developing archival inks in 1994. He was very nice when I called him, as I said, and said, how do we make inks that won't be archival? And he invented quad black inkjet printing in 1995. In 1999, he founded inkjetmall.com, where, for those of you like me who like to make prints, it's a great resource. So thank you for coming. Michael Foley opened Foley Gallery in 2004. Of course, we wanted to have a gallerist directly here. After 14 years of working with notable galleries, including the Frankel Gallery, Howard Greenberg Gallery, and the Yancey Richardson Gallery. In 2008, he founded the Exhibition Lab with partner Sasha Wolf as a study center for people involved in various aspects of art and photography. He should feel, I assume, very at home here since you teach here at SVA.
Yeah,
You've been in this room, I assume, before.
I teach in this room tomorrow.
Okay, so he's very at home here. The pole, this is like this pole is not even here to him. It's invisible now. He also teaches and lectures on photography at ICP. And last but in no means least, welcome please W.M. Hunt, who's been collecting, looking at, and talking about photography for decades, for about 40 years. And he's an author, I think as you all know, of The Unseen Eye, Photographs of the Unconscious, which was published by Aperture in 2011, a dealer and founding partner of Hasted Hunt. He's a teacher here also. Do you teach in this room too? No. He's never.
This room.
He hates this room. Sorry. But he's also a teacher here as well as at Aperture and at ICP. He's working on apparently more projects than I could count. While he writes lectures, reviews portfolios, judges competitions, he serves on the Eugene Smith Memorial Fund Board as well as the Center of Photography at Woodstock. So we're glad you could find time for this too. Thank you all for being here. There was much more we could say, but I wanted to get to you. So let's talk. Let's start with a straightforward question. What was your initial reaction to the idea of fugitive art?
I thought conceptually it was fantastic because certainly in my business, we've seen photography pushed forward in some aspects through technology, from tintypes, daguerreotypes, all the way up to the processes we have now. It's always been pushed forward through technological means. And also in our field, there's a certain degree of acceptability as each of these new mediums comes into play. So I love this because this was so counterintuitive to what I get from clients sometimes or people about how long something will last. So I love it, and it's because of photography being potentially endlessly reproducible that I thought this was so conceptually mind-blowing. And then I thought, well, why not even go a step further and just destroy the negative or the original file so that any remembrance of this image would be completely deleted. And so I thought that was fantastic.
John?
Well, my reaction, and it got a little bit bolstered today by seeing the exhibition, was I would be worried about art with gradual fade, because you spend a lot of time, photographers spend a lot of time, at least working with printmakers, making prints that are absolutely perfect, proofing, proof after proof, sometimes working days, weeks. And so they're trying to arrive at something that once it begins fading, that's the part that worried me. And today when I looked at the exhibition, they're really fading quickly. And is that everyone's best foot forward? Is that indicative of that artist's vision? So that was my first reaction.
And I want you all to know that because we ran into John at the gallery today, and he said this, we tried to then coerce him into helping us make inks that would fade in like a day. So there would be no doubt that it was meant to bring meaning to the idea. But an interesting notion that it could be in the wrong stage of fading and just look wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I'd rather they go for like a month and then they disappear like that. Like that plant that blooms every 30 years.
You all heard it. John is going to help us to formulate the next Fugitive Art 2. Alan, any thoughts?
Well, I guess the first thing that came to mind was a quote from Samuel Johnson. Depend upon it, sir, when a man knows he is to be hanged in a fortnight, it concentrates his mind wonderfully. And I was reminded of that because it seems to me that one consequence of engaging with a work that you know is going to disappear, whether it's going to just leave your hands or whether it's actually going to disintegrate or become invisible in some way, is to force your attention to it in a way that it might not, that you might not attend to it if in fact you simply believe it's just going to be there forever. So the idea of that kind of pressure being put on a viewer to really look carefully at something, to enjoy as much of it as he or she can because it's going to be gone in a predictable amount of time, seems to me to be a very interesting idea. I don't have any problem with this as a critic and historian, except for the following, which is a kind of a cavil or question that I have. As a critic, as a historian, part of my concern always is to ensure that in the discussion, whether that's the discussion a critic is having with his audience or in the classroom discussion or in any kind of dialogue with my colleagues, that we're talking about the same thing. I'm very concerned with shared definitions. And of course, that includes the idea of a shared work of art. That is, I want to be talking about the same Julia Margaret Cameron. I want to be talking about the same Eugene Smith. I want to be talking about the same object or the same bookwork or whatever as my colleagues are talking about if we're going to have a fruitful discussion, because otherwise we're talking apples and oranges. So my concern with the idea of the fugitive print, if that's all we're going to have, is that, going back to what John was saying, if this work is changing as we see it, right, as we engage with it. I went to the opening on Tuesday. John saw it, today is Thursday, 2 days later. He says that they've already deteriorated. Now, I can't compare today to Tuesday. I haven't been there today. But that means there's been a change. So that means that the pictures John saw are not the pictures that I saw. And so if John and I are going to talk about the content of that work, then we're really talking about two different works. And that, to me, is a problem as a critic. I don't say that that impeaches the idea, but it's a problem as a critic and historian that one would have to grapple with any kind of ephemeral or temporary work of art.
And a couple of reactions to that, but one defensive and one just to add. We would assume that under normal lighting, not 1500 lux UV lights, we would not be talking about different works. But isn't it true that photographic prints, silver gelatin prints, made and dodged by hand, we'd often be looking at very different prints if it wasn't the same print?
Actually, the person who got me thinking about this whole area of archival, et cetera, is a guy named Grant Romer, who some of you may have run into. He used to be the conservator, chief conservator up at George Eastman House. And somewhere, probably about 40 years ago, I wandered into a lecture that Grant was giving basically on conservatorship and archiving, et cetera. And I was 4 or 5 years into my work as a critic, and I have to tell you that the whole issue of archival seemed to be so technical that it really wasn't on my radar screen as a critic, and I wasn't yet a historian in any significant way. But Grant gave for me, a kind of a spellbinding lecture in which he talked about the useful life of a photograph. And he said basically it's a work on paper, it's a light-sensitive work on paper, it has a lifespan. How are we going to expend the lifespan of a given photograph? At that particular moment, Eastman House was about to tour, I think it was 100 vintage Julia Margaret Cameron prints going to 10 different venues around the world. And he was saying, he argued basically that they were going to use up 10% of the useful life of these prints. Everything was going to be done in temperature, humidity, light-controlled environments up to, state-of-the-art standards, et cetera. But the changes of venue, the changes of climate, the travel, et cetera, was going to use up 10% of the life of these prints. And he was proposing that should be questioned. Not that it was necessarily wrong, but it should be questioned. Was it a valuable way of using up that 10% of the life of those works? So, that's a kind of a long answer to your short question. But yeah, that it affects all works on paper, and it certainly affects all light-sensitive works on paper. I mean, when we say permanent, we almost always have to preface that with the word relative, I would say.
There is no permanent. Bill, what was your reaction?
My first reaction was that I thought it was a total boondoggle. I went, this is just nuts. And I had a very, I thought, funny conversation with Susan about it. And I think she was like, oh, Lord. And I thought about it a lot, and it prompted lots of different thoughts. And it's funny because you come around to Michael a little bit in that as a conceptual piece, it's totally valid. it's a kind of art making I've got no problem with. You want to do it, do it. I was concerned with the panel that it was about the collectability of this thing, and I was going, oh my God, it's hard enough selling the good ones. The museum thing about the camera, I think this is right, but when the Modern toured the Gursky show, they, rather than borrow those prints, they printed them all for the New York show, printed them, face-mounted the works, toured the show, and then they threw them away. And I thought, you know, as a conceptual piece, that's as good as the show, because those prints were not going to last. And they said, well, we'll just step over that. They didn't have to borrow anything from anyone. They just put them out there. And it's like when I think the Jan Althusser-Tranche shows that toured, where he would do these aerial photographs and print them on canvas. Hewlett-Packard would do them, and then they would lash them to the walls or to the gates. And I was in Paris, and it was at night in the Luxembourg Gardens, and there's a photo show outside, and there are hundreds of people looking at this thing. So in terms of its intentionality as a populist event, fantastic. And I was talking to the people, I said, so what happens when these get wrecked? Print a new one. Just put it out there. So it was not about the object, it was about the event. And I find that stimulating. And you know, one of the things in your build up to this, it always seems to have been important that it was on paper, that it behave, that some of the rules be the same for traditional color printing. And I didn't know why that was. Why'd you print them on paper? Why didn't you just show them as slides? Why didn't you print them on bread? I wanted to see those bread pictures printed on bread, rotting away. I thought that would have been so cool.
For those of you who haven't been to the show, there is a wonderful series by Johanna Martinson, which is a set of a city built in bread that is being eaten and deteriorating, which is wonderful. Well, I can answer.
And then you can do the video of it and show the video of it, and then in 20 years they wouldn't have the platform to show the video anymore, and so it would be a really fully realized conceptual, several decade-long event.
Right, and we're going to talk a little bit about other media a bit into this, but to answer your question directly, Susan and I felt that there may be issues around the understanding and appreciation of prints themselves. So we were hoping to do something like you were talking about, which is to free some of the worry and expense from it, that there was no value in the particular print, but that the image itself might spur someone to think that they would want an archival print to keep.
What is the paper that it's printed on?
It's on Epson enhanced matte paper. There's nothing particularly special about it. It would last quite a long time, but we were hoping to ease people into the notion of the image being valuable, not necessarily the object. But we were easing them into it. Could have been printed on bread too. Let's move forward to the second part of this. Not every idea is loved at birth, so I really appreciate your stories about both positive and negative reactions, but perceptions do change over time. The Eiffel Tower was erected as part of the 1889 World's Fair, and it was despised by many leading artists, by many leading citizens. The 1913 debut of Stravinsky's Rite of Spring piece caused a riot after the second act. Both are now not only mainstream, they're loved, and they certainly aren't seen as being controversial. As part of the preparation for this discussion, we actually sent you all a few prints. And maybe this is getting, Bill, a bit to your question about why prints. Did it make a difference that after we called you with this crazy idea, you weren't sure if it was a boondoggle? Did the fact that there were some prints attached to it give it seriousness? Did it feel different? How did having prints that you knew were going to go away, did that change things?
Do you mean in the envelope you sent
Yes.
us? It didn't change it for me,
Okay.
but maybe because I'm too close to prints already.
You're surrounded by prints
Right.
all the time.
Right. I mean, I could understand the idea and concept, but the overwhelming thing was how would they look as they I can't get past that as they fade and the artist's intent shifts and changes and people are maybe seeing the artist's work for the first time. I can't get past that.
Well, you have a lot of responsibility in the nature of that.
Perhaps.
Did you pin them up in the sun to watch them die like victims?
You know, I've been traveling a bit lately.
Are you going to do that now just to satisfy your...
I could put them in our testing chamber and give you, you know...
I can see you blogging on that. That would be fantastic and give people a sense of the screaming agony of
I could find out a lot in
work.
about 7 days.
Alan, any
Well,
thought?
I think that for me, there's several different levels on which this idea operates, or several different, I don't want to say levels, several different territories in which they operate. It operates. One, of course, is the possibility of someone actually building in, using the deterioration process as a way of consciously shifting the content. For example, suppose you created it so that as certain inks faded, other things would come through, and the image would actually change in a planned way. So it would be like, Susan used the word palimpsest when we were talking about this the other day. So there would be kind of layers to the image that as it changed, eventually it would completely fade away, but something deliberate and intended would happen during the fading process. That would be a creative way of using this, right?
Absolutely.
The other, and this is more a marketing way, but I don't mean this in a kind of simply a financial sense, is that it seems to me, and I've been talking about this for 15 years or so, that we may be moving away from a purchase model to a subscription model in the arts, or at least that the digital technology generally, I think, in various ways enables a move from purchase to subscription. That is, you could subscribe to an artist in a certain way, right? And if you paid $100 a year subscription to any of the artists in this show whose work you admired, you would get, let's say, a new print every 3 months that would fade in 6 weeks, let's say. And you would also get online studio visits, and at a certain other subscription level, you'd maybe get a permanent print by that person, etc. So instead of thinking about our relationship to an artist as, well, I like that thing, I'm going to buy that thing, we could start to move culturally to a relationship to artists of, I respect this artist's work, I want to subsidize this artist's work, in effect as a kind of patron of it, not by buying a thing, but by being a subscriber to that artist for some period of time.
And we're going to come back to it, and I want to pursue this further. But before we leave this, and Michael, I'm kind of interested in, what did you do with the prints?
Scott, I was scared. Susan called me for the interview, and she said, "What did you think of the prints?" I said, "I don't know." She said, "What do you mean?" I said, "I haven't opened them yet." I said, "I'm scared to open them." And so the gray manila folder was sitting by my desk for a long time. And then because I thought, if I open them, and then by the time we have a conversation, there'll be nothing left to talk about. So I opened them, and I was excited, but then I quickly put them back.
Were you excited because they were free?
Yeah, free for a little while, and then they were gone. But so that was exciting to me because, in my business, and not just my business, everyone's business up here, is that there's a certain delicate, the print is a delicate thing, not only in the way the light hits it, but the way it's protected, and so it's fragile. Talk about the wearing white gloves when you handle the prints, and dings and dog-eared corners and things like that. We describe prints based on their condition. And one of the things we talk about is shifting, silvering on the surface, traditionally. So I'm very accustomed to preservation in all means. So when something comes into the gallery that is fragile, but fragile out of my control, at least I think it's out of my control, then that worries me. And then that's when I just tucked it away, but we had a nice conversation, and one day hopefully I'll enjoy the prints.
And I'll have to second that. It was very odd. Susan and I were packing those. Well, first of all, we got out the corrugated cardboard, not buffered, just regular corrugated cardboard. That was strange. And then I think Susan was starting to put one into a sleeve, and we said, well, why does it need a sleeve? It's a fugitive print.
Yeah, no, they were treated, and going back to the print issue, they were treated, as any other print would be treated. I mean, I received them and I felt like someone is really considerate when they're putting this package together for me.
Right, and then we realized that with the last one I sent out to someone, I thought, why am I putting this in a plastic sleeve? I mean, this is nuts.
Yeah.
It's not totally contrary to the concept.
I don't know if you guys can hear Susan, but she's saying it was nuts to do that. But again, I think that we were, and Bill, it's interesting you mentioned this why prints again. It was an odd duality to us that we were taking great care in finding the artists, in trying to print the work, in trying to pack it and send it, and yet the objects themselves, some which became damaged in moving them, we just said, we'll just make another one. It was a very odd duality. So, sorry.
Bill has
Bill.
a question.
The surprise for me was that the image made more sense with the concept, that there was a leveling, there was a sort of veiling part, there was a disappearance in the subject matter. And I thought, well, that's good. I like that the people who you brought into this are offering up images that are supportive of the concept. So the two things went together. And I didn't know that until I actually saw the print. And that may be, it changes your metabolism. You're looking at the thumbnail and you go like, oh, yeah, sure. But then it's on the counter and you go, oh, I see. Oh, it's a monkey's face and And so it changes the time of looking at it, and I saw it quite differently.
And we heard that from some of the artists, because we didn't ask them to make work for this show, but we did ask them to submit work for consideration that somehow resonated with the ephemeral. And we actually hoped, not so overtly, that the more it was personal in the way that it related, the better the work was.
There was also a picture that I really liked at the show, but not because of the content. It's the purple picture. Who's the purple picture?
Rito.
There's, all the way on the left, there's these vertical curtains that are purple, and they just look like the pigment was put on with a matte knife, and it has nothing to do, has very little to do with image capture in an even way. I loved that it was a mess. I don't know if he or she is here, but the color had this great edge, and it didn't behave conventionally. It wasn't nice. And I saw it right away, and I went, And that'll change probably very aggressively. And that would be worth seeing. Can you send it to me so I don't have to go see it? You can just go.
We'll ask the artist.
Okay, thank you.
I thought it was the rumbling of the microphone. It's the thunder outside.
The gods agreeing.
Bill, actually, when we talked before the session, you said you're not as obsessed with objects anymore.
No.
You're not. And Alan, you recently wrote, if I could buy ebook versions of my 100 favorite photo books, starting with Robert Frank's The Americans, at a reasonable price for an ebook, that you'd splurge right now. So I have to ask, as photographs are viewed more and more in digital form, what's gained? What's lost by that?
By viewing digitally?
Digitally.
Humans are not designed to stare into light. So
Could you lean a little closer to the microphone? It's a little hard to
sorry.
hear.
I don't think that human beings are designed, their visual systems, to stare into light. So there's a whole psychology involved in looking at electronic images. And I think you can prove that to yourself. I mean, even if you're color managed, you can prove that to yourself by making prints. And most people work on images endlessly while staring into the light of a display and spend less time making prints. So I think a lot is going to be lost as we move away from a print culture to one that's inevitably going to be a digital display culture. And I think that what this show possibly does is call attention to that's what's disappearing is the print. I mean, a lot of photographers have web, they have Facebook, they have all these other vehicles that weren't available to them earlier. to show their work, and that's great. You know, you get a really wide audience, and it disappears rather quickly. But making prints has always been, in a way, what photography is about, and that beauty in a print, and why we buy prints or why we make them. So digital isn't necessarily friendly to that, and also maybe some people say, I'm not in total agreement with this, but some generations don't have the patience to look at prints, you know, and so I think it's going to be a lost art soon, fugitive.
I hope not.
Yeah.
Alan, thoughts about what's lost?
Well, I hesitate to use the word lost because it's a loaded word. Digital imaging technology enables, for the first time, digital technology in general, for writing as well as for images, enables the production of images or texts without the concomitant production of objects. Photographers were object makers de facto because there was no way of transmitting a photographic image to anybody else unless you made a thing. Now, you might not have made that thing for it to be thought of as a thing. Newspaper photographers did not make their negatives, and the dark rooms at newspapers did not make the prints, and the newspaper printing presses did not print the newspapers with those images on them, Ouija's images, let's say, in order for you to say, look at the way that picture looks on that newsprint. Oh boy. No, it was the only available form in which Ouija could transmit his work. But, and it had its own unique tactile qualities, et cetera, yes, but people were not buying those newspapers and hoarding those newspapers away in order to really relish that front page of, you know, it was the only way that Ouija could get his picture to us, right? So digital imaging enables a photographer to make images without necessarily making things. The making of a thing from that image becomes an option rather than a necessity. So now we're all of an age here where for us there's an issue of loss in that because we grew up with a tactile memory of images on paper, whether those were reproduced images in a book like The Americans or Minamata or whatever, or whether those were fine photographic prints or even crummy photographic prints on photographic paper of some kind. So we have that tactile memory built into us from childhood, right? I mean, I'm never going to forget what dust on old books smells like. But there are people here who probably have little or no experience of the smell of a secondhand bookstore and the dust that accumulates over decades in a secondhand bookstore. Unless you go down to Strand, you know, you could pick that up. They could bottle that for me. But there's a generation of people growing up with the experience of making images without making objects and engaging with images and texts without engaging with objects.
I'm going to challenge that a little bit and ask the audience if they'll help me out. It seems that we've got photographic projects like the bringing back of Polaroid film. We had a printer at the opening which you could send your iPhone pictures to a receipt printer and print the most horrible black and white scan. Like, there seems to be actually a fascination that I've seen with all generations for objects. Do you really think, I'll just throw it out here, just to push back a little bit, there seems to be a hunger for images on paper too, or is that not true?
Oh, I think that's there, but I think that's a very specific segment of the broader audience for photography. Right? Okay. I mean, we're at a moment in the history of photography where all of the major historical processes in the medium are being actively practiced at the same time. That's a unique moment, right? We have living daguerreotypists, living tintypists, living ambrotypists, living wet collodion printers. God help us, wet collodion, right?
You're doing that next week, right?
You know. Yeah. And you know, so that, and there are people who are eager to learn and make those, and there are people who are ready to acquire and live with those, and that's a great thing. But that's a very, very small corner of the larger traffic in images.
So that's a niche. Michael, jump in on this. What are you thinking about?
Whoa, okay.
This digital,
Well,
what's gain, what's lost?
it's so interesting. I would say two things. I like a lot of what Alan's saying. No, three things actually. First and foremost, I'm in an object business. I sell objects, I don't sell images. I represent my objects through images on screen, JPEGs and et cetera. But at the end of the day, I'm selling an object, a three-dimensional thing, a thing that has weight, a thing that bends, things that needs to be protected, preserved, cherished in a certain way. It's put in a frame, it's set aside that way. It's secluded from, the environment by being encased in something and put up on the wall. So it's interesting because the other day in the last 2 or 3 years, whether because of the economy or expense, I'm not quite sure, or people just don't look at mailers anymore, but several of my colleagues no longer send printed invitations to their exhibition. And some that do now have shrunken their invites to little postcards 4 by 6. And so I've been thinking about this because I do send email announcements for my shows, and they get the image, people get the image. And I thought maybe I should do away with announcements, but I thought, no, I'm actually gonna upgrade my announcements to make them even more beautiful, because at the end of the day, I'm selling objects. And I think if someone gets something in the mail as an object and they have to go through the process of opening it, pulling it out, it kind of initiates them or introduces them to buying the object when they get in. But I would say to Alan, and actually to the audience, which I think you kind of started by saying, we all are here of a certain age and a certain experience. And I think the only way to really answer that question about different generations still enjoying the object is, to ask people in the audience in their 20s, is the object important to them at all? It certainly can't be nostalgic in a way because they haven't had it before. But I'd be curious about that because I don't know.
So let's ask a question. We've got large projected. Oh, sorry. Apparently posterity must have me talking to the microphone. So we have a gigantic print, projected image. We have a simulation here of an iPhone where you could decide to flick it away in a moment, right? And we have a 4-foot by 7-foot print on the wall. Who wants the print?
Calm down.
The price is right.
Well, okay. So, who wants to pick someone for getting the print? Who wants to be the?
Who wants to do what?
Bill.
What?
Pick someone who gets the print.
The person right there who put their hand up. Go take it. It's yours.
Come here for a second. Apparently, you had to talk in the microphone too.
And then when you have kids 70 years from now and they're going through your effects, they go, what the
And they
hell
find
is
this
this?
crumbled.
It'll be
unwritten
gone. By the way,
paper.
first of all, I need to tell you, it's a fugitive print. Okay, so just for starters, it's only a loan to you.
The part that's not fugitive, though, is when you put it on the wall and it leaves a yellow square behind it, that part will stay.
So tell us why you want the print, as opposed to we could send you the iPhone picture.
I want it out of curiosity. I want to see how it deteriorates over time,
Okay.
just for that.
So, but the object
Take
itself
one
is
of
kind
us
of
home.
interesting. He wants to see the picture die.
Yeah, take
The
this
object
puppy,
itself,
too.
it's interesting because it's, in a sense, more real. It's there, and that's why it makes it different from a projector or email image or
Thank you. What's your name?
Juan.
Juan. Scott. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
I've had a thought in the middle of all this, which is that paper wrecked photography. I spent a lot of time last year working with iPads trying to do these apps that dealt with glass plate positives and autochromes. And when you saw autochromes on the iPad, it was better than seeing the autochrome because you could actually handle it. You didn't have Grant Romer there going like, don't touch it. And not only that, you could fix it. You could go and if you could color correct it, you could, if it was cracked, you could fix it. And you could have toured an autochrome show with, even if you go to a museum, they don't show you the autochrome anymore, they show you a facsimile. So it had, and we had these Wright brothers positives from the National Archives of flight, and you looked at these on even a laptop, the computer screen, or on your iPad. The iPad is amazing because it's so luminous, and this is what the instinct was initially in photography, to put it on glass. And so the 160 years there as a paper just wrecked it. So.
And this is why we separated you from John.
Thank you.
Michael, you're the buffer of this.
No, but I'm thinking of those photographers who gave us the fine print, you know. So, and not all, some photography is very impact based. You know, it doesn't need to be this seductive platinum print. And then there's some photography that's absolutely related to the way it's printed. I mean, it's exposed thinking about how it's going to be printed. So it's just, there's two different subjects, potentially.
Well, you know, we are tactile, sensual creatures, and until we evolve into those sort of sci-fi people with, you know, with the enormous heads and little spindly arms and legs, which we're not now, and we just sit in chairs and we're force-fed and we do everything through electronics, we're going to continue to be tactile and sensual creatures, and we're going to want to engage with things. And we want those things to have a wide variety of thingness to them, to give us a menu, you know, the broadest possible menu of stuff to engage with. So I don't think that that our relationship to photographs as things is necessarily going to go away. But it's a fairly limited number of people who have an active, considered relationship in their lives to photographs as things.
And
I mean, even people with real physical family albums don't usually sit there and, ooh, look at that, oh, look how grandma's faded, you know, or oh, the smell of this album is so delicious, you know, or look at those 1920s photo corners. You know, they're going to it and looking at the images and talking about what's in the images, and they'd probably have the same conversation if that were digitized and put on their iPad.
And Alan, we're sort of supporting your view here. Just a few interesting charts. There is the HP. This is just general printing. And you look at the decline in printing. Even photo paper availability. So I made my start in doing custom black and white exhibition printing. But even photo paper availability as a non-specialty item. And you look at what's going on with the territories and the real estate for galleries, that is shrinking. Mm-hmm. So your notion of this niche seems to be supported, that we have made way for a digital world. We haven't lost this, but it certainly is smaller.
Right. And at the same time, the number of people making and variously distributing and engaging with photographs is rising in exact opposition to that decline. Right? I'm willing to bet that everybody in this room is carrying a camera. Anyone who is not carrying a camera, an object that makes photographic images, raise your hand if you're not carrying a camera. Is there anybody?
I think you've made the point.
Right. So, I mean, and you can walk out on the street. It's not just SVA. You can walk out on the street, and I'm willing to bet that 80% of people out on the street are carrying cameras. And not only carrying cameras, they're making photographs, and they're sending them to each other, and they're saving them, and they're putting them up at Flickr or you know, someplace online, and they're in some way engaging with photography in their daily lives in a way that they would not have been 25 years ago. So whatever there is that's lost, that's the real democratization of photography. When everybody can carry a camera, when little kids are walking around with a cell phone that includes some kind of camera, that's the real democratization of photography.
So, and I know you guys have already talked a bit about this, just knowing that an image will self-destruct, change its meaning. It almost sounds with what Alan is saying, that with all this stuff being produced, it would be good if it died, that if we keep all of the images being made, we'll be just buried in them. I mean, do we need mortality in imagery?
The internet is in a constant state of decay. I mean, it's not something that's permanent. It's just constantly receding into the past. So all those images are decaying. But the print itself as an object, I don't know that I like the idea that it's designed to decay. If potentially that's the one way that the photographer says this is my work, this is my intention. So I see those, unrelated. I mean, there's an endless sea of even prints being made out there too.
It just becomes performative. That's the difference. So it's like a singer who sings the song. You go to see the performance of it, and it's over. You could buy the record. That's a different version of it. But you could go see I was thinking about the clock, and I don't know anyone that sat through all 24 hours of the clock. So everyone's experience of the clock had to have been a tasting of it, and that's a kind of unusual arts and experience where nobody's going to see the whole thing, nobody can take the whole thing in, so you're going to go in and try a little of it. And then there's this program where you send your naked picture to somebody, and then it disappears.
Snapchat.
That just like, when I heard about that, I went, that's fine. I have no idea what's going on, but that's the same thing.
So introducing performance is actually a really strong element that could be part of this then.
Yeah, that actually resonates with me. The idea that you could have a photograph and really enjoy it that day, maybe that weekend, and then it's going to die. I like that.
There's this thing that I saw in Santa Fe, that the history of art in Santa Fe for the last million years, and they had this photograph of a sun dagger that the Anasazi Indians had done, and twice a year this projected silhouette of a dagger would appear on a rock during the solstice, and twice a year, it's a little more complicated than that, but that's it. And not only that, somebody wrecked it. They moved the rocks. So you think, oh, the rocks are forever. Nope. But a completely ephemeral photographic event, or at least light-driven, that you would think would be permanent, although only twice a year. And when I saw that, I was just dazzled by it. I thought, oh, this is so cool, because this is really, really the beginnings, and it's man trying to harness light and communicate with that.
So it's limited time, not a limited edition.
It's like smoke signals.
Let-
Edition of 10.
But that's been there before digital. When the collecting scene in photography began to emerge in the 1970s, late 60s, early 70s, and the gallery scene began to emerge, that's really when the whole issue of archival came in, right? And so everyone was this was still 99% black and white photography was under discussion at that point. But so people began to become aware of that, and they developed special print washers and the product chemistry itself to ensure the archival life of black and white photographs. And then color came in the middle 70s, and there had been color photography before, of course, but some processes were introduced at that time that made it possible for the first time to make your own color prints in your own home darkrooms without poisoning yourself. And so a lot of photographers began for the first time to explore color, and everybody here is sort of old enough to remember that. Well, there was a photographer named Michael, and the question of archival quality of color, of course, immediately emerged in the fine art photography market for prints. And there was a photographer named Michael Bishop, who's pretty much forgotten at this point, but he moved from monochrome to color, and he was asked about the issue of the permanence of his prints. And he gave what I thought was a really interesting and germane answer. He said, think of my prints as a performance. Each one will have a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? Now, which would have been true because many of those processes that were introduced then were in fact fugitive, but fugitive on a slower decay scale than this. But that idea of the print as a performance, which ties in with Grant Romer's notion of the useful life of a photograph, and ties in with this idea of fugitive art, is really built into aspects of the medium. The question is, how long is that half-life or shelf life or whatever we want to call it, the full life of that work going to be? But if you put it out in the light, even in the best conditions, even framed, even all archival, even all of that, there is over time likely to be some change, and it may just be slower than you're going to observe in your lifetime, but that work is not forever.
And I want to move into an economic realm because, to your point, the perfection of some of the technologies to allow for prints that are, for all intents and purposes, long-lived enough for the questions that people used to have about, if I collect this, if I keep this, am I buying dust, are past. So we move into a different economic realm, and I'm sure you all know that this is, by the way, diamond sorters for De Beers, and De Beers is a cartel that controls diamonds. Diamonds are a semi-precious stone, not a precious stone, but the artificial manipulation of markets in order to create value and to modulate value is a well-tested and well-performing economic theory. So in the fine art world, print editions are designed to do exactly the same thing. Now, obviously, intaglio prints, stone lithography, there were limits to how many prints you could get from a plate or a stone. So editioning was certainly related to the notion of there was a deterioration literally in the quality of the work as it was pulled. But in digital prints, there's no such limitation. We can continue to make print after print after print that are exactly the same. So the notion of editioning applied to digital printing is an artificial economic imposition, correct? So it's a way to create initial value that's higher, and it's a way to make sure that the objects that are sold will have residual value, that they will not be made worth less by flooding the market with additional prints. So we have an economic view. So given that digital media makes it possible to make essentially unlimited, identical fine art photographic prints, are we denying its essential nature by forcing it to fit an economic model, which is to create value? I mean, we're editioning in order to increase the value of smaller numbers of prints. Are we denying the essential nature and possibility of digital?
Well, I had an unhidden facial gesture when you said we could make, countless prints. Many prints exactly the same. I think that's a real challenge for anybody to make prints that are exactly the same digitally. And so most people probably have had that experience.
There are lots of variables. I'm not a printer, but I know there are lots of variables. It's humidity. It just changes. It has to be calibrated all the time. And where are you going with this?
Where I'm going is, well, obviously, photography, since there have been negatives and there's been print medium, we can make many, many prints.
Right.
Making prints using an enlarger to silver or platinum paper introduced the human hand and other variables, which were very, very difficult to control in terms of commonality of prints. Digital media certainly has improved our ability to make prints that are more similar, maybe a fairer way of putting it. It's in its nature to allow for the creation of more prints. We are limiting prints for the commercial market, for the fine art market, with editions, not because inherently it must be edition, it's for an economic model.
But you're denying an essential part of the market here, which is that there are very, 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 very few great photographs. There is a tsunami of good photography out there. The things that interest me as a dealer are the great ones. And the whole thing is treated much, much differently. So that this notion of just keep printing them. For whom? Why? Yes, the model's accurate. You can do that. To what end?
So you feel there, in other words, we don't need more prints, is essentially your argument.
You seem to deal in these absolutes. I absolutely
just to
don't
moderate,
need
just,
them.
just in moderating.
I absolutely don't need them.
Okay.
And I don't want them either.
Okay, no, fair enough. I'm just trying to understand.
But you know, those shitty little brown ones, I love those shitty little brown ones. Those snapshots at flea markets, I love them. Keep bringing them on. So
I think digitally speaking, probably I mean, I don't have any data, but I would say probably 90% of all editions have not been editioned. And most people who have access...
What does that mean? What do you
Okay,
mean?
let's say a photographer is going to do an inkjet edition of 60.
Okay.
Very few of them,
Will have actually produced all 60.
all 60 of them, because the medium allows you to not do that. And it's also very difficult to control the sameness over time. So there may not be that many prints in the world as we think there are, if we were to look at them in terms of the amount of editions.
So people are self-limiting in terms of they can't sell them, they're not going to make them.
Exactly. And so you could go and get print number 2 of 250. It actually may be one of 2. You'll never know.
And it increases the perception of value that it's editioned.
Well, it would increase it if there's only one of 2.
No,
Well, I'm asking you, does it?
that's, if you go to the photographer and say, how many did you, I don't care if somebody editions stuff. I want them to keep records. I want to know how many there are.
Right.
So that if I have a client, I go like, there's 17 of these. So Noctway, for instance, does two sizes, but he does one number. He does 30 prints. Whatever size he is doing, that's 30 prints. And he'll tell you how many there are. You can't get him on the phone, so that's not a good example. But I want to see the record. I want to know how many you did, because then I can tell the client, there are 5 of these.
Because the limit has meaning even if it's never reached. Yes?
Sure.
If
Yes,
it's 2, it's
But in
okay.
this regard, it could have a negative meaning if the edition was planned at 250, but only 17 are produced. By the way, I'm working with James right now,
Oh, yeah?
and we spend days
He's,
just to get this color balance.
you can get him on the phone. That's so good, so impressive.
But to get this color balance just so perfect. I mean, he has like one of the finest eyes of anyone. So this idea of something, changing, I mean, spending all that work to make this really beautiful print and then having that color balance go off in 3 days.
You're not going to sleep tonight, I can tell. This is going to haunt you.
I probably will.
I'm sorry, we were just trying to spark discussion, not haunt you. Michael, what's your feeling
It's
about
not that
editions?
the object there is not the product of wonderful reproducibility. What you have there is incredible technical tools that you didn't have before, so that you can get the color on this print exactly in a way that he wants, so that it's just like getting better lenses to do things, to see things more clearly.
Well, I mean, I think simply you're right. I mean, the additioning or let's say limiting of the amount of prints you're going to make, to me, is only applicable in the art world. I mean, there are many photographers out there that just enjoy doing photography, and if they have a friend or a family member that wants a print, they'll print it. So be it. And they can print it, without limitations at all. And I mean, I miss the days in a way when prints weren't editioned, and it was not the objective to make them the same. And in fact, they were different, so that you look at prints made by an artist, whatever, let's say Helen Levitt, in each decade of their life, or Ansel Adams or Lee Friedlander or whatever. And as papers change, as their eyesight changes, as their chemicals change, as they see the images they made 20 years ago differently, then it starts to get scholarly, and you start to talk about the interpretation from the negative, not only from a personal point of view of the artist's vision, but also what's available technologically. And that's a discussion that we don't usually have when the ultimate goal seems to be to make, although maybe impossible, to make every print the same. So that in my gallery, when I have an artist's work, and I show people the work, I generally don't actually show them the work. I show them stand-ins. I show them what they call handling prints that I handle a lot and that get damaged and dinged. And someone will look at a print and say, I want that one. And I pretty much have to guarantee them that the print they're going to order is going to be the same as what they're looking at, okay? Right. And that just enables me to work better and more efficiently. But it's not, the case when prints weren't edition, or you had a Robert Frank print or any other vintage print, you're like, this is it. This is the object. Do you want this object? Now, even though I do sell objects, I often sell the images too, because I represent the objects through images, either on the screen, actually, or as a imposter, if you will. So it's interesting, but I miss the days when things weren't edition and that each print was taken and interpreted a certain way. And then, as I said, you see the same image printed over different decades and how people changed that. Croppings were different, all that.
But these are intentional expressions.
Yeah, truly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think it's funny how the print market has invaded the book market and the collectability of books, that now people want to know they want to know what the edition of the book, I mean, the edition may have been 3,000, but people are going like, they're all gone. I don't want a second edition, I want a first edition. So it's a funny thing that the object quality of the book is in some respects what happened with photography too.
And really trying not to be absolute, it was more that feeling that some of these constraints, which are driven by market need or a selling process, sometimes start to interfere with that free flow of varying prints, of having the ability to enjoy the book without worrying so much about whether or not it's exactly the right number in the edition. That they do intrude in the conversations. I mean, any of us who try to sell work or talk to people about work, there seems to be that first question is, what's your job? And then second is, well, how many are you making of this? And it's just an interesting phenomenon that intrudes so much on a discussion of something that really should be an aesthetic discussion. And that was why we were getting into this notion of, is time another variable? I mean, should we play with time? You were talking about loaning before of subscriptions. Mm-hmm. Should we use other methods to control the economic and commerce system as opposed to just trying to limit the supply?
Well, to rephrase the question that you were asking a couple of minutes ago, if you, let's say Bill or Michael, can sell one print of yours to one buyer for $1,500 on the premise of your guarantee that that print is made to last at least their lifetime, or you can sell 700 of those prints at $20 each, but they're going to deteriorate. They're only going to last a year, let's say, right? But you can sell 20 of those prints to 700 of those prints to 700 people and make as much money from that, right? Which one do you prefer as an artist, right? If I can work with a publisher who will print 1,000 copies of one of my books and sell it for $24.95, or I can self-publish that book as an ebook and sell it for $3.99 per download and make as much money as I was going to make, which one do I prefer? I might very well prefer doing the print on demand or the ebook.
So what are you trading off? You're trading off.
Well,
obviously, economically, you could be the same. Is it prestige?
If the economics are approximately the same, or even more in my favor, actually, if I self-publish as an ebook, mm-hmm. because there's no storage, there's no production cost. I mean, the production costs are very minimal, etc. I'm losing the prestige of the imprint, whatever it may be, of that publisher's, imprint, right? But I'm enabling I'm potentially broadening my market for my work by keeping my price so low that anybody can impulse buy a book of my essays.
How the rest do you feel about that? Because this is this notion of democratizing, disintermediating those who have been the purveyors, the gallerists, the curators, the people who try to filter what's out there. This model of going direct, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Is it?
No,
I think it's just another thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a thing. The technology has enabled us to do, and I think that it was first done. Things like Jen Beckman's project 20 by 200, where you're making work available for $20 because it's, first of all, it may not be the best print quality, but the edition is huge, and the size is small. So if you want the image, you can get it for $20 or $40 of some artists maybe that don't know. And then, I don't know much about her model, but then I know she expanded to get artists with a bigger name, like Mike and Doug Starn, and Bill Wegman started to do prints on that site. So that made, what is it, the tagline, art for everyone, or, something like that. So that made images accessible to anybody that had $20 and, access to her webpage. So, I mean, this could be yet another, a way to make that art available to the masses. And I like the subscription idea. I like that. I like it. It's like rent to buy. Okay, it's like, I'm not sure if I really want it. I'm not sure if I want to spend the money on it. I'm going to rent this thing. And they have art rental. There's a San Francisco Museum has an art rental gallery in San Francisco that you go in, corporation, and you rent art for whatever, $20 a week. And then if you like it, maybe you'll buy it. But if you don't like it, you're like, next. And you bring it in,
Yeah, the
and you
Museum of
subscribe
Modern
to
Art
that.
used to do that here.
Yeah.
But that's how they used to place all the photographs from the modern. Everybody rented them. They didn't buy them.
Who rented them?
You could rent all those photographs.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. There's there's a very empowering thing in society now. If a photographer has finished school and they say, I'm so frustrated, I want a book, I want a gallery and everything, and I go, well, go do a Kickstarter campaign. Do the whole thing. You can do the whole thing. You don't need me. And not only that, if you do it, I'll give you $100, so you're already $100 in. Do the work. If you're the artist and you're so chafing with wanting to get it into the world, that's thrilling. I just think that is this explosion, the potential to reach audiences, that's just great. Kids send me Kickstarter stuff. Knock yourself out. If it's within a mile of something that seems feasible, here's $100, kid. Yeah, I really want, and I don't want the print. Just send me the book, or send me a little 4x5 print. That'll be fine. I don't need. They always want to do so what should I make it 30x40s available? And you go no. Ask me for the $100. And I'll be happy to do it.
And by the way, I think this spirit of experimentation was our greatest hope from all of this. And this is our last sort of question for you all before we ask the audience because I know they have some questions for you. Michael, you were talking about you had little postcards and you thought maybe we should send John, something more interesting.
Right.
Maybe you could send them fugitive prints. What crazy ideas might you have? I think we had a discussion where it was, I forget whether it was you or Alan, about being able to ship a show somewhere, just put it in a big tube and send it. You don't even have to insure it. What kind of crazy things that might shake things up, that aren't so precious, that maybe they're horrible ideas, but they could get things going? What crazy ideas do you have that might come out of this? No crazy ideas.
Yeah, I don't know.
I like my autochrome idea where you send 30 iPads to somebody and say, here's your autochrome show, turn them on. Guard comes in the morning and pushes them all on. There you got your show. I love the idea that the Harry and David Art of the Month.
Why not? I think that's very similar to what Alan's talking about.
Did you all not see the Harry and David part of that?
Test drive, artist subscriptions. All right, I'm going to open it to the audience.
I actually like this idea too of the subscription, and I live up in Copeg, New York, which is 2 hours from here. A lot of farmers markets and all that, and they have CSAs, which are, you get the fresh produce as it's in season. And I thought about this for a minute. I'm like, this can go all season, every season, with this photography idea. Try out somebody's concept, see if they like it, and not get too, spend too much money to start out. Anyway, I just like this idea, and it's kind of new to me. I don't know if it's been batted around lately, but anyway.
What was the famous corporate collection on Park Avenue that had a big collection and they sold it off, and the office buildings were very modernist? What's this company? Help me.
Seagram's, no.
Yeah, Seagram's collection.
Seagram's, right.
So the Seagram's collection, you work for Seagram's, you could go to the art office and pick a print. You couldn't put anything on your desk, but you could take a print and have it in your office for a year, and then go back and get a different one. So that was a kind of city farmers market.
Yeah, and by the way, I was reading about someone sort of exploring the food co-op model with art. I can't remember where this was, someplace here in the States though, where basically you did the same thing. You put in a certain amount of money, and local artists were commissioned with that money to produce a work of art, either one of a kind or multiple or whatever. But you came in each month and you got a little bag full of art, right?
Why not?
And if, you didn't get to pick it. It was whatever the crop was that particular month. But you went home with a bag of locally produced art. And again, these are sort of variations on this idea of a subscription model of work that might have a shorter lifespan than other work. Certainly as a curator, the idea of being able to produce a show without having to worry so much about shipping, crating, etc. I was actually working on a show by the Chinese dissident artist Liu Sha and helping to circulate that show a year ago. And one of the proposals I had, we had to shut it, long story short, we had to shut the show down because she and her husband, Liu Xiaobo, who's in jail in China, the Nobel Peace Prize winner, there's a lot of politics around him, and the show was creating problems. So we had to shut it down. But we were circulating prints, but one of the ideas that I was promoting to a number of venues before we shut the show down was, you don't have to take the prints. I can give you good high res digital files. You make the prints. We did this in Hong Kong, actually, in Taiwan. I'll give you high res digital files. You make the prints. You put them up. You frame them, or you laminate them, or you do something with them. But you put them up for the duration of the show, and then you destroy the prints. And that was fine with that imagery. And I wouldn't suggest that for an Edward Weston show necessarily. I don't mean destroy real Western prints, but I mean even imitation Western prints, because I think with Western you need to see the object. It's very important to see the object that he made. But with Liu Sha, it was not important to see the object, it was the imagery that was potent.
Right.
By itself, that's all that mattered. She's not really a printmaker per se. So I thought, as a curator, what a chance to open up venues that could not handle an exhibition of finely made physical prints because of weather and temperature conditions or lack of security, etc. But you could have a show of the images.
Understood. Any other questions from the audience?
I also think the subscription model is really fascinating, but I'm curious, how do you think that model affects the notion of art buying as potential investment?
Well, I just think it's a different thing, And as I may have mentioned, I think hypothetically that if I wanted, sometimes a client will want to see something in their house. But if they had the image sent to them, knowing that this is an impermanent image and that it would fade, they may tack it up on the wall, literally. I mean, one time I sold this big 60 by 72 inch print to a client. Now, they wanted to live with it, so I brought this little 11 by 14 thing in, and they had this big white wall, and I taped it right in the middle, and then I taped out and blue taped the scale of the image. So if you squinted your eye and you kind of looked at it, you kind of saw it big on the wall, right? So I thought, this could be something. I could actually say, just send it to the client, say, this is the image, live with it for a while, literally. Tape it on your wall, see what it looks like. And then if you want it, then we have this to offer you. So we always have that, but I think the subscription model can be something like the 20 by 200 in that it's open for everybody. Let's like Bill's saying, let's get it out there, let's spread it out there as much as we can, inseminate the world with imagery like that. But if someone really wants to invest in it,
Did you say inseminate?
I did. If you want to invest in it, then we have something for you as well. Okay? Yeah. It's just like the Kickstarter, it's like, okay, maybe you don't want the 30 by 40 print, but the Kickstarter, there's always like $5 and there's a shout out, or $5,000 and dinner with the artist and this and that. So there's choices. As long as there are choices to be made, then I think there's something for everybody there.
Yeah. I don't think they're incompatible, because I think you can have different subscription levels, and this is maybe going to what Michael's talking about. You could have one low subscription level where you simply get digital images. You know, I mean, you as the artist simply going to send them a different digital image that they can live with on their laptop or whatever their media are for a month, and then they'll get a new one the next month. But then there could be another higher level where they would actually get some kind of physical print, but not a particularly long-lived physical print. And then there could be another level where they would get all of that plus a physical print a year, right, et cetera. So they don't have to fight with these ideas. Don't have to fight with each other.
Any other questions? I want to then thank our panelists. It was great to have you here, A.D. Coleman, John Cohn, Michael Foley, W.M. Hunt. I want to thank again Katrine Eisman and the the SVA MPS in Digital Photography program. I want to thank you all for coming, and we'll come and see the show before the prints are gone.